I never expected a hollow ceramic Christmas tree ornament to save my life. It sat forgotten in a box of old decorations for 4 years, until the day my brother-in-law tried to steal my farm and left me a check for $5,000 like I was some seasonal hire he could fire. Today, I run Tannenbaum of Betrayal Tree Farm, and every customer who buys a Fraser fir gets a receipt printed with a criminal docket number, while Gary trims boughs in a vest that reads, "Needled by fraud." This is exactly how it happened. My name is Vera. I am 52 years old, a widow, and before I poured my husband's life insurance into 40 acres of North Carolina red clay, I was a soil chemist for the State Extension Service. I spent 20 years analyzing pH balances, nematode counts, and micronutrient ratios so farmers could keep their orchards alive. My father ran a hardware store in Winston-Salem and taught me how to sweat copper pipe and pick a pin tumbler lock before I learned cursive, skills I tucked away and never expected to need again. David, my husband, was an architect who designed passive solar homes that practically heated themselves. We met when he came to the lab to ask about radon mitigation for a client's basement slab, and by the end of that consultation, I had a dinner invitation and a lifelong fascination with the way his mind built structures that lasted. He thought in load-bearing walls and legal easements, in quiet systems that held everything up long after the blueprints were filed. We were married 17 years. He died of pancreatic cancer 3 months before our farm's first saplings went into the ground, which meant everything after that was me trying to honor a dream he scribbled on a napkin on our last Good Saturday together. A little sketch of crooked rows under a drawn-in sun. I cashed out his $115,000 life insurance policy and planted 15,000 Canon and Fraser fir plugs on a south-facing slope with drip irrigation lines. I trenched myself. Gary, David's younger brother, was my partner. He had the sales smile and the Rotary Club handshake, the kind of man who remembered your birthday but forgot every promise he ever made. We notarized an agreement that gave me 60% equity, him 40%, and included a clause he thought was sentimental fluff. I got a lifetime free tree for my front porch every December, any size I wanted, no questions asked, delivered by his own hands if I asked. The document was witnessed by Mr. Thornton Halderman, a semi-retired attorney who had handled the land purchase and whose embossed notary stamp was as familiar in our county as the sheriff's badge. At the time, I believed Gary's handshake was as solid as David's memory. I was wrong about a great many things, but that belief was the first domino to fall. The farm thrived slow. Conifers don't sprint. The first 2 years, I ran soil moisture probes and fine-tuned the fertigation schedule, mixing soluble ammonium nitrate at precise parts per million, while Gary handled sales calls from church groups and corporate office parks trying to book authentic choose-and-cut experiences 3 seasons in advance. By year 5, the lower field held 8-foot trees with symmetrical crowns and terminal leaders so straight you could hang a plumb line off them. The needles were a deep blue-green, the kind of color that looks like it was printed on a magazine cover, and the scent alone could make you believe in winter again. That's when the landscaping conglomerate Greenscape Holdings sent a real estate scout in a waxed pickup who walked the rows for 20 minutes, counting trees per acre with a handheld clicker, and then offered $800,000 for the land and mature stock, contingent on a clean title and immediate dissolution of all existing partnership encumbrances. Gary's eyes turned into cash register drawers the moment he heard the number. I saw it happen in real time, the flicker of greed replacing the brother-in-law I thought I knew. Everything unraveled 5 days after the offer letter arrived by certified mail. I was in the propagation shed, sleeves rolled up, mixing a batch of mycorrhizal inoculant with peat moss and vermiculite, when Gary walked in with Melissa, his wife, and a manila folder thick as a Bible. Melissa is the kind of woman who describes herself as a brand strategist, but could not tell you the difference between a Norway spruce and a telephone pole. She wore a cream blazer with gold buttons that probably cost more than my entire drip tape manifold, and she smiled at me the way you smile at a cashier right before you ask for the manager, a tight, practiced baring of teeth with no warmth behind it. "We have an opportunity to secure your future," Gary said, sliding a document across the workbench. My hands were crusted with peat moss, so I didn't touch it. I just looked at the header, Mutual dissolution of partnership and full release. Underneath, a series of paragraphs stacked like a wall of bricks. Consideration, indemnification, waiver of rights, full mutual release of all claims past, present, and future. And in the signature block, my name, Vera Catherine Eames. Except I hadn't signed anything. The ink was a thin blue ballpoint, the letters formed with a rightward slant I didn't use, and the loop on my capital V closed the wrong way. "That's my signature," I said, my voice flat. Gary nodded, slow and patient, the way you'd calm a frightened horse. "You signed it last spring, Vera. Remember, when we were in the barn and you said you wanted to simplify things? I think with David's anniversary hitting you hard, it's understandable your memory is a little foggy. Grief does that. The offer is generous. You'll get a check for $5,000 and we'll handle all the loose ends so you can rest." Melissa placed a check on top of the folder, aligning its edges with the paper like a gift in a boutique. It was a cashier's check for $5,000 drawn on a bank I didn't recognize, a small regional credit union 2 hours south. My name was misspelled as Vera. The memo line said stump settlement. That word choice was not accidental. It was a message. She thinks of me as a stump, something dead and cut low, something to be ground away. I felt a coldness move through my chest that had nothing to do with the shed's temperature. It was the cold of a blade you don't see until it's already inside you. I let my face go slack. I let my eyes go unfocused and watery. I reached for the check with trembling fingers, held it close to my face as if I couldn't quite read the numbers, and said, "I suppose if it's already done, then maybe I need to just accept it. My head is so foggy lately. Let me think overnight. I just need to sleep on it." I made my voice waver on the last word. Gary's relief was so thick you could have sheared it like wool. He patted my shoulder, his palm heavy and damp, and said they'd come by in the morning so we could put this to bed. I watched them walk back to their Lexus, Melissa's heels crunching the gravel, and I kept the slack expression on my face until their taillights disappeared around the curve. That night, I did not sleep. I drove to my farmhouse, locked every door, and shut off the ringer on the telephone. The house was the one David designed for us, with south-facing windows that caught the morning light and a foundation poured deeper than code required. I went to the attic crawlspace accessible through a ceiling hatch in the hall, pulled down the folding ladder, and climbed into the warm, dusty air. In the corner sat a single cardboard box labeled David's First Christmas in his handwriting, the block architectural lettering I would know in my bones until the day I die. Inside were the decorations from our first year in the house. A string of C9 bulbs with ceramic bases that still smelled faintly of electric warmth. A hand-carved nativity set where Joseph's staff was a twig David whittled on the porch, and a ceramic Christmas tree ornament shaped like a tiny Fraser fir with a hollow base. Its glaze, a deep forest green flecked with gold. David had made it in a pottery class the winter before we met, and for years it hung on our tree like any other knick-knack, unnoticed and beloved. Gary had tried to throw it in the donation pile after the funeral, picking it up between 2 fingers and calling it dollar store junk. I had grabbed it from the trash bag when no one was looking, clutching it to my chest in the kitchen while the funeral reception hummed around me. I never knew why I held onto it so fiercely until that moment. I cradled the ornament in my palm under the bare bulb of the attic light and turned it over. The base was not solid. A thin seam ran around the edge where glaze had been applied over a ceramic plug, almost invisible unless you were looking for it. I carried it down to the kitchen, found a butter knife in the drawer, and worked the tip gently into the seam. The plug resisted for a moment, then popped free with a soft click. Inside, coiled tight like a miniature scroll, was a sheet of heavy bond paper sealed inside a polyethylene zipper bag with a silica gel packet tucked beside it to keep moisture out. I unrolled it with shaking hands and recognized David's precise architect script immediately, the capital letters with their tiny serifs, the lowercase g that always looped a little too wide. "Vera, if you're reading this, I'm gone and Gary is showing his true colors." Inside this ornament is the original partnership agreement, notarized by Thornton Halderman on March 12, 2015. It contains a survivorship clause and a dead man's switch provision. Any amendment, dissolution, or transfer of interest requires a live notarization before Halderman himself, or a deposition of his records filed with the county register. Since Halderman died 2 months ago, that will never happen. Do not trust Gary. Do not let him near a notary's stamp. This document is your shield. Save yourself and save our trees. I love you beyond root depth. Alongside the note, still crisp and smelling faintly of old paper and silica, was the original partnership agreement. I recognized the font from Halderman's old IBM Selectric, the slight unevenness of the key strikes that only a typewriter produces. The notary seal was raised and distinct, a circular embossment you could feel with your fingertip, with Halderman's commission number and expiration date pressed into the paper. Comparing it to the forged dissolution Gary had presented, I immediately spotted 3 fatal differences. First, the notary block on the dissolution was a flat ink stamp, not an embossed seal, and it lacked Halderman's unique pattern. Second, my supposed signature had a slant and pressure profile that a forensic document examiner would flag in seconds. The baseline was wobbly, the stroke width inconsistent, and the terminal strokes of the V were open where mine always closed. Third, and most damning, the dissolution referenced a partnership recorded in Book 1247, page 89 of the county register, but our actual agreement was recorded in Book 1248, page 112. A simple digit transposition, the kind of mistake a forger makes when they're copying from a photocopy and not the original. Gary had never seen the original, because I had it the whole time, sealed inside a decoration he called junk. Before I continue this story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you believe that a promise made in good faith can outlast any lie. Now, I had to play a role so convincing that Gary and Melissa would drop their guard completely. The next morning, when they arrived with a notary they'd brought from 2 counties away, a nervous young man with a stamp that smelled of fresh ink, I answered the door in my bathrobe, hair unbrushed, clutching the $5,000 check like a security blanket. I let my robe hang open just enough to look disheveled. I told them I'd been up all night crying, that I felt so confused, and maybe they were right. Maybe I just needed to let them handle things. I let my voice crack on David's name. I didn't mention the ornament, or the attic, or the fact that I'd spent 3 hours after midnight photographing the forged document under a macro lens with a ruler for scale, documenting every discrepancy in a spiral notebook I then locked in a safety deposit box at a bank Gary didn't know I used. I had already made copies of David's note and the original agreement, storing them in a secondary location, because I understood that people who forge signatures are also people who might break into a house if they get desperate. I just need a few days to get my head straight, I said, dabbing at my dry eyes with a tissue. Please, David's death is hitting me all over again. I don't know if I'm strong enough to make big decisions right now. Melissa's eyes flicked to Gary with something that looked very much like triumph. Of course, sweetie. Why don't you come stay with us for a while? We don't want you alone in this big house with all these memories bouncing off the walls. We'll take care of everything. You can rest, and when you're ready, we'll handle the paperwork together. This was their control tactic. Isolate me, monitor my movements, get me away from any neighbors who might ask questions. I accepted with a grateful whisper, packing a single suitcase that contained nothing incriminating except the hollowed-out bar of soap in my toiletry bag, which held the safety deposit box key. I left the ornament and the original agreement inside the box, locked behind a bank vault door that required 2 forms of identification and my right thumbprint to access. By that evening, I was installed in their guest room, which Melissa had redecorated in a shade of mustard so aggressive it felt like the walls were frowning at me. The sheets were synthetic microfiber that crackled when I moved, and the only window faced a privacy fence 6 feet away, blocking any view of the street. They gave me a temporary room key that I later realized only opened from the outside, a detail they probably thought I was too foggy to notice. I noticed everything. For the next 2 weeks I did nothing but observe. The house was a split level in a subdivision where the HOA mandated mailbox colors and the acceptable height of ornamental grasses. I learned its rhythms quickly. Gary left for meetings at irregular times, often returning within an hour, his face pinched. I could track his anxiety by the length of his pacing in the basement. When things were tense, the footsteps on the Berber carpet ran from the office door to the far wall and back, 12 seconds each way, a metronome of desperation. I timed him one afternoon, 18 minutes of non-stop pacing before he made a phone call that started with, "This is Gary Keller. I need an update on the underwriting review." and ended with him slamming the phone down hard enough that I heard it through the floor. I overheard phrases that told me exactly how close the deal was to collapsing. The title company is asking for an affidavit of no adverse claims, and we don't have it yet. If the surrender of interest isn't notarized by Friday, the contingency kicks in and the seller can walk. I don't care what she needs to hear. Tell her it's a routine form. Just get her signature. That last one was spoken in a hissed whisper while I stood in the hallway, holding a glass of water and pretending to be lost. I learned to walk with a slight shuffle, head down, so they'd forget I had ears. Melissa's stress manifested as a frantic consumerism that was almost theatrical. Packages arrived daily. A $1,200 espresso machine she plugged in once and abandoned. A Peloton bike she never assembled still in its box blocking the garage. A designer dog bed for a miniature poodle that did not exist and never would. I cross-referenced the return addresses with my mental map of their finances and realized they were spending against the anticipated sale proceeds, building a debt cliff so high that if the Greenscape deal didn't close, the fall would destroy them. This explained the desperation. This also meant I had a time limit, because people willing to commit fraud become willing to do much worse when the walls start closing in. The breakthrough came on a Tuesday afternoon when a supply line to the guest bathroom toilet burst. I had been sitting on the edge of the bed, reading a book I'd already read 3 times, when I heard a faint hissing that escalated into a gush. Water geysered across the tile, soaking the bath mat and beginning to seep under the baseboard into the hallway carpet. Melissa screamed, a theatrical shriek that could have been for a spider. Gary, who had never held a wrench in his life, started Googling emergency plumber near me, while the water kept flowing. The earliest available plumber could arrive in 4 hours, at an after-hours rate that Melissa immediately began calculating out loud. I walked calmly to the garage, stepping over Melissa's Peloton box, and located the main water shutoff valve behind a stack of untouched yoga bolsters, still wrapped in plastic. I turned the valve clockwise with both hands until the flow stopped, then walked back inside and asked Gary if he had a pipe cutter and a 1/2-inch brass compression coupling. He stared at me like I'd spoken in Aramaic. "I'll fix it," I said. "My father ran a hardware store. I apprenticed with him 40 years ago, sweating pipe and threading fittings. This is just a 1/2-inch copper supply line, pinhole leak from galvanic corrosion. 20-minute job if you have the parts." Gary rummaged under the sink and produced a dusty toolbox I'd noticed during my earlier reconnaissance. It contained a miniature tubing cutter, a roll of emery cloth, and a small plastic organizer with assorted fittings. I cut out the damaged section with the tubing cutter, rotating it around the pipe until the wheels scored deep enough to snap the copper cleanly. I deburred the edges with emery cloth, smoothing the burrs until the pipe ends were bright and symmetrical, then slid a compression nut and a brass ferrule onto each end. I fitted the coupling between them, hand-tightened the nuts just past finger tight, and gave each a quarter turn more with an adjustable wrench until I felt the ferrule bite the pipe. Turned the water back on at the main valve. No drip, not even a bead of moisture. I dried the joint with a rag and stood up. Melissa looked at me with something approaching awe, but also calculation. Gary just looked relieved, and in that moment I understood something pivotal. These people were completely helpless without someone to solve their problems, and yet they still believed they were the ones in control. They saw my competence as a tool to be used, not a threat to be respected. That mistake would cost them. The toilet repair gave me a legitimate reason to be in the basement where Gary kept his home office. I'd seen the door when I went to find the toolbox, a solid core door with a keyed entry lock, an interior-grade Schlage lever set that was a step above the cheap privacy knobs everywhere else. That told me he was hiding paperwork he didn't want me to see. That night, after they'd gone to a restaurant to celebrate what Gary called the final stretch, I retreated to my mustard room and retrieved a small leather kit from inside the hollowed-out soap bar. It held a tension wrench and a short hook pick, tools my father had given me when I was 12, sitting at his workbench with a practice lock that clicked satisfyingly when I got the shear line right. I had not used the skill in 30 years, but muscle memory is a stubborn thing, and my fingertips still remembered the feel of a pin setting. I waited until the house was silent, then walked barefoot to the basement door. The Schlage had 5 pins. I inserted the tension wrench at the bottom of the keyway and applied light rotational pressure with my index finger, just enough to bind the first pin. Then I slid the hook pick in, felt for the pins, and raked them gently. Pin 4 bound first, a slight resistance that told me it was sitting above the shear line. I lifted it until I felt a tiny give, then moved to pin 1, then 3. The plug rotated a fraction of a degree, the false set that tells you the lock is almost open. I adjusted tension, lifted pin 5, and the plug rotated fully with a clean snick. The dead latch retracted. The door swung open. Inside was a metal filing cabinet with a combination lock, but I didn't need picks for that. Gary's organizational system was a sticky note on the bottom drawer that read, Combo, 7-19-52, which was David's birthday, a fact that would have made me angry if I had the luxury of that emotion in the moment. The cabinet contained a meticulously organized trail of fraud. The forged dissolution was there, along with 5 photocopies of varying quality, showing they'd been experimenting to get the signature reproduction just right. There were emails between Gary and a shell company called Blue Ridge Tree Holdings, LLC, which a quick corporate registry search on my phone revealed had been formed 2 months ago with Melissa listed as the registered agent and a business address that was a P.O. box in a strip mall. There were wire transfer instructions directing the $800,000 from Greenscape to a business account in Delaware that had no connection to our partnership, routed through an intermediary bank that specialized in asset shielding. Most telling, there was a promissory note indicating Gary had already borrowed $200,000 against the expected sale, personally guaranteed, with the partnership's tax ID number listed as collateral. The interest rate was punitive, 21%, and the maturity date was 3 weeks away. If the deal didn't close by then, the lender could foreclose on every asset tied to that EIN, which included my farm. Then I found the document I had feared but expected, a certification of sole authority, signed by Gary, attesting under penalty of perjury that I was incapacitated and unable to manage my affairs, and that he was assuming full control of the partnership assets. It was dated the same week he'd first asked me to sign. Paper-clipped behind it was a 1-page medical evaluation on the letterhead of a doctor, Pamela Voss, M.D., stating that I exhibited early signs of cognitive decline consistent with vascular dementia, and that I was not competent to enter into financial contracts. The signature was a looping scrawl I didn't recognize, and a later search of the state medical board would confirm that no physician by that name had ever been licensed in North Carolina. Gary had fabricated a diagnosis to justify stealing my land, and he'd had it notarized by the same nervous young man from 2 counties away. I photographed every page with my phone, taking care to capture the edges of the paper for scale, the watermarks, the staple holes. Then I slipped everything back exactly as I'd found it, relocked the filing cabinet, and stepped out of the office. I relocked the schlage, wiped the knob with my sleeve, and returned the lockpicking kit to my soap bar. The next morning I drove to a branch of First Carolina Fidelity Bank, where a safety deposit box held the original ornament document, and I asked to speak with the branch manager. Her name was Mrs. Yvonne Hewitt, a woman in her 60s with a compliance officer's soul and a grandmother's smile. I'd known her for years through church, and she had a reputation for spotting a fraudulent wire like a hawk spotting a field mouse. I laid out the evidence on her desk. The photographs, the forged dissolution, the medical evaluation, the shell company records. Her face settled into lines of cold professionalism as she examined everything under her desk lamp. She didn't blink. "This is textbook financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, Vera. The forged deed, the shell entity, the attestation of incapacity, the fabricated medical opinion. I can freeze any accounts tied to this partnership's EIN within the hour. But if you want this to stick, if you want charges that survive a plea deal, we need to coordinate with law enforcement." She tapped a key on her keyboard and pulled up a file. "David came to see me 5 years ago. He established a special trust provision tied to the partnership agreement. Any dissolution not notarized by Thornton Halderman personally triggers an automatic reversion. The entire partnership interest flows into a trust with you as the sole trustee." He told me, and I remember his exact words, "My brother has a habit of rewriting reality to suit himself. Make sure the paper wall is higher than his ambition." She reached into her desk drawer and produced a thumb drive, small and black, with a silver logo. "This contains a cloning script. If you plug it into Gary's laptop, It will mirror the hard drive and upload everything to a secure FBI server. I have a contact at the white-collar crime task force in Charlotte, Special Agent Terrence Cole. He recovers diverted assets for fraud victims. If what you've shown me is accurate, Gary is facing multiple federal counts, and this thumb drive will turn his own computer into the prosecution's star witness. I asked her for one favor: let me set the stage. I wanted Gary to walk me into a room where he believed he was winning, and then I wanted every wall in that room to close in at the same time. Mrs. Hewitt understood. She gave me the thumb drive and a burner phone with Agent Cole's number pre-programmed. I slipped both into my purse next to the ornament. The opportunity to use the drive came 3 days later. Gary and Melissa announced we were going to Greenscape's corporate office in Raleigh for what they called a final signing. They dressed me in a navy blazer Melissa picked out, a boxy polyester thing with shoulder pads that made me look like a confused flight attendant. On the drive, Gary kept his laptop bag at his feet in the passenger footwell. At a rest stop off I-40, while Melissa went to the bathroom and Gary paced outside, making yet another frantic phone call about the grant deed writer needing a notary waiver before the wire clears. I leaned over, unzipped the laptop bag, and slid the thumb drive into a side USB port. The drive's indicator light blinked amber once, then twice, then settled into a steady pulse as it initiated the cloning script. The entire process would take about 20 seconds, and by the time Melissa returned and snapped her compact shut, I'd removed the drive and tucked it into my sleeve. The tracking software required only that the computer stay powered on for the next 6 hours, which it would, because Gary never let his laptop go dark when a deal was in motion. The meeting at Greenscape was a sham. The conglomerate's legal team had already flagged the title irregularities and postponed the closing twice. Gary spent the whole meeting smiling too widely and promising that the partner transition logistics were nearly resolved. The closing officer, a woman in a gray suit, kept glancing at me with a look I finally placed as pity. I nodded through the entire presentation, squinting at the documents as if I couldn't quite follow the words, while Gary's foot tapped an anxious rhythm under the table. I said nothing. I was a stone. On the drive back, Gary's phone rang. He put it on speaker. It was Mrs. Hewitt, her tone professionally crisp and entirely unrevealing of the trap that was about to spring. Mr. Keller, this is First Carolina Fidelity Compliance. We've received an automated alert regarding irregular wire activity on account ending 4479, which is linked to your partnership EIN. As a precaution, we're placing a 72-hour administrative freeze pending verification of authorized signers. Please have all partners appear in person tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. at our main branch to validate identity and sign a ratification affidavit. Failure to appear will extend the freeze indefinitely. Gary's face went white as moonflower. Melissa started hissing questions, her voice rising. I let a look of confused alarm settle on my face and said, "What does that mean? Are we in trouble?" No, it's routine, just routine," Gary said, his voice cracking on the second routine. "Vera, you'll come with us, right? Just to straighten it out, it's nothing." He was already doing the mental gymnastics to believe his own lie. I nodded with the docility of a lamb being led to shearing, and in that moment I felt something inside me harden into a diamond. That night, after we got home, I set the maximum cruelty test. I had no intention of faking a heart attack, but I needed a moment where they would reveal themselves so completely that even if some remnant of family loyalty still flickered in my heart, it would die forever. All day Melissa had been making little jabs. "Vera, you're so lucky we're handling this for you, you'd be lost in the paperwork. Don't worry your pretty head, we've got it." The condescension was a knife, and I decided to turn the blade. After a tense dinner of takeout pasta that Melissa criticized for having too much garlic, I stood up from the kitchen table, clutched my chest, and let out a choked gasp that was half real. I crumpled to the kitchen floor, one hand splayed against the linoleum, my cheek pressed to the cold tile, my eyes half closed but watching through my lashes. Melissa glanced down from her wine glass. "Oh, Vera, not again. Gary, she's doing one of her spells." Gary stepped over my legs, literally stepped over my body, his loafer brushing my calf, to reach the counter where his folder sat. He grabbed the notary paperwork and checked the time on the microwave clock. "Hang in there, Vera. We'll get you some water in a minute." He walked out of the kitchen to make a call, leaving me on the floor. Melissa nudged me with the toe of her Italian loafer, a gentle prod as if I were a rug that needed straightening. Then she stepped over me to the refrigerator, the door swinging open just inches from my head, and retrieved the bottle of Prosecco. She poured herself a fresh glass while I lay at her feet, my heart actually racing, not from a coronary event, but from the cold, clarifying rage that comes when you realize you are nothing more than a line item to someone who shares your dead husband's DNA. I saw David's face in my mind, his kind eyes, the way he would have scooped me up and carried me to the car. Gary and Melissa would have let me die on that floor and argued about who got the farm. I lay there for another 90 seconds, counting my breaths, feeling every beat of that rage crystallize into resolve. Then I got up, dusted myself off, and went to my mustered room without a word. They did not ask if I was okay. They didn't even look up. The next morning, 9 a.m., First Carolina Fidelity's main branch conference room. The table was polished walnut, and the chairs were leather with brass studs, the kind of furniture meant to signal permanence and trust. The seats were occupied by Gary, who wore his best suit and a strained smile. Melissa, who had accessorized with a pearl necklace and a tight jaw. Me, in a plain cardigan I'd brought from home. Mrs. Hewitt, who sat at the head of the table with a folder that contained every document I had given her, and a man introduced as Special Agent Terrence Cole of the FBI, who had a badge clipped to his belt and a level gaze that had seen more audacious fraud than this. Gary's laptop sat open on the table, its hard drive already mirrored on a federal server thanks to my rest stop thumb drive, its secrets laid bare. Gary began smoothly, leaning forward with his elbows on the table. We just need to clear up a little administrative hiccup. My sister-in-law and I are dissolving our partnership amicably. She's here to sign the ratification form. Right, Vera? He slid a paper toward me. It was the same forged dissolution, now with a fresh signature line for me to reaffirm my consent and a line for a notary to stamp. I looked at the form. I looked at my name already printed below a signature block. I set my hands flat on the wood and did not pick up the pen. No, I said. The word hung in the air like a bell struck once. Gary's smile flickered but held. What do you mean, no? Vera, we talked about this. You agreed. You're just confused. I unzipped my purse and withdrew the ceramic tree ornament, its green glaze catching the fluorescent light. I set it in the center of the table, gently, as if it were a piece of evidence in a trial, which it was. Melissa snorted. What is this, a craft bazaar? Is now really the time for holiday decorations? I ignored her. I unscrewed the ceramic plug, slid out the rolled document and David's note, and flattened them on the table. The raised notary seal of Thornton Halderman caught the light, its ridges casting tiny shadows. This is the original partnership agreement, notarized by Thornton Halderman on March 12, 2015, I said, my voice steady enough to drive nails. It contains a dead man switch clause. Any amendment, dissolution, or transfer of interest requires live notarization before Halderman himself. Mr. Halderman passed away 2 years ago. His notary records are on file with the Register of Deeds, and his embossed seal is unique, coded to his commission number. The forgery you've been waving around has a flat ink stamp, not an embossment. It references the wrong recording book number by 1 digit, and my signature is a traced facsimile that any forensic document examiner will identify in 10 seconds. You also filed a certification of incapacity with a fake medical evaluation from a doctor who doesn't exist, because you assumed I was too foggy to notice. You stepped over me on the floor last night, Gary. I was lying on the kitchen floor and you stepped over my body to grab your paperwork. You didn't check if I was breathing, but I was breathing, and I was watching, and I have everything. Gary's mouth opened, then closed. Melissa's face went through 3 shades of panic. Special Agent Cole reached over and turned Gary's laptop toward himself. Mr. Keller, you've been monitoring your financial transactions for the last 48 hours via a federal warrant. The shell company Blue Ridge Tree Holdings, the promissory note with the partnership's tax ID as collateral, the certification of incapacity, the fabricated medical evaluation, and the email chain where you discuss getting her signature one way or another. That's wire fraud, identity theft, elder financial exploitation, and a false statement to a financial institution. Conservatively, you're facing 10 years minimum per count. The computer on this table has already uploaded a complete mirror of your hard drive to our servers. We have every file, every deleted email, every draft of that forged dissolution. He nodded toward the door, where 2 uniformed county deputies entered. Melissa started backing away, her voice climbing. I didn't know anything, I just signed what he told me to. This is all Gary, I'm a victim too. But Agent Cole was already reading her rights from a laminated card he pulled from his jacket. She would later plead to a lesser conspiracy charge, but her name was splashed across the local paper next to the words, accessory to elder fraud. And the screenshot of her mugshot circulated in the county Facebook group for weeks. Gary was arrested on the spot, his wrists cuffed behind his back while the deputies walked him past the walnut table and the ornament that had undone him. The Greenscape deal was voided within 48 hours because the title company refused to close with a pending federal investigation. And the trust David had quietly established years earlier kicked in automatically, exactly as Mrs. Hewitt had explained. Because the dissolution was fraudulent, the entire partnership reverted to a trust with me as the sole trustee. The farm was mine, free and clear, every tree, every acre, every row of drip tape. The legal process took 8 months. Gary's defense attorney tried to argue that the dissolution was a mutual misunderstanding, that the medical evaluation was a draft he'd never intended to file, but the digital trail misses. Hewitt helped me assemble was irrefutable. He pled guilty to 2 counts of wire fraud and 1 count of forgery. The judge sentenced him to 36 months of probation, 200 hours of community service, and full restitution of the $200,000 he'd borrowed against the farm, plus interest and legal fees. The restitution was secured by a lien on his house, which Melissa had to sell in a short sale to avoid foreclosure. They moved into a rented apartment on the other side of the county, and the community service was to be performed at a location of my choosing, because I was the victim and the court believed in restorative justice. I chose the farm. Specifically, I chose to make Gary work every one of those 200 hours on the very land he tried to steal, under my direct supervision. The probation department approved it. On his first day, a cold morning in late October when the trees were just starting to show their winter color, he arrived in a county-issued van wearing a gray sweatshirt and the posture of a man who knows his fall has been public. I handed him a high-visibility vest I'd ordered specially. Custom embroidery across the back, in bright orange thread, read needled by fraud. Beneath that was his probation case number, 23CR0447, stitched in smaller letters. I told him, "You wear this every minute you're on my property. If you take it off, I call your probation officer and you go to prison." He looked at me with something I think was supposed to be hatred, but it came out broken and small. He put the vest on. I renamed the farm Tannenbaum of Betrayal Tree Farm, ordered new signage in a rustic reclaimed wood style, and updated the website myself. Business doubled the first season. People love a good story, and even better, they love knowing the man in the vest got exactly what he deserved. During the Christmas season, when families walk the rows looking for the perfect tree, Gary is out there with loppers and impugners, wearing his vest, silent while kids ask their parents why that man looks so sad. I stand on the porch of the old farmhouse, a warm mug in my hand, and every December I put up a free Fraser fir right where David said I always would. Every tree tag, every receipt, every price sign prints a small line at the bottom. Probate fraud docket no, 23CR0447. It's a passive reminder that fraud has a paper trail and a public record. Sometimes customers take a photo of the tag and post it online, and the story ripples out again. Gary's humiliation is a renewable resource, and it generates exactly the kind of attention that keeps a choose-and-cut farm thriving. David's foresight still takes my breath away when I sit with it long enough. He didn't just build a house with southern exposure and a foundation 6 inches thicker than code. He built a legal fortress around the one asset that could sustain me, and he hid the key inside a ceramic ornament that his own brother threw away as junk. He knew Gary's character in ways I never wanted to see, but he loved me enough to prepare without alarming me. That kind of quiet, unsentimental protection is the deepest love I have ever known. I don't spend a lot of time on anger anymore. I spend my energy on soil tests and bud counts, and making sure every family who drives up our gravel road leaves with a memory that is honest. Integrity isn't a holiday decoration you hang up for show. It's the root system that holds you steady when the storms hit. Have you ever discovered a dark secret about someone you trusted completely? How did you handle it? Let me know in the comments. If If you believe the truth is worth holding onto, even when it's buried inside something that looks worthless, hit that like button and subscribe. I'll be here next time with another story of betrayal, resilience, and the small objects that change everything. This is Vera, signing off from Tannenbaum of Betrayal, where the trees stand tall and the fraudsters haul mulch.